Okay, everybody, thank you for coming. Welcome. I'm Helen Schwencke. I think I'm the first presenter for today. So thank you to Woodfordia and to Sandra for organising this, and in particular I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're on, the Jindaburra Nations people, their leaders emerging present, past and emerging. And the more I get into any of this sort of material, and I can feel like I'm scratching the surface. So if you actually lived on country, surrounded by it all the time, it would have been just freaking amazing. Because just even little dips into it is really amazing. So we live on an amazing planet that I think we've been sold a huge pup on. It's just so amazingly complex and exquisitely complex, and I've only sort of made a tiny, tiny scratch in the surface. And people say I know a lot, so I don't think I do, because every time something comes up I find out I know almost nothing. Anyway, so today's talk is largely about caterpillars, butterflies and their caterpillars and their life cycles, and I'm doing a few more later in the week that start looking into the complexity. So the basic message is we actually do need to care for caterpillars and all the juvenile parts of creature life cycles. I go much more into like how that all fits together in other talks. But I was having fun with alliteration one day. I hope you like alliteration. So learn to love larval life forms, boost beautiful and bountiful biodiversity, and the more you do it, Sandra can attest, the more you look, the more amazing it becomes. And nurture nature near you. And we just need to start planting local native plants so that are actually from the area, so that nature can thrive in our urban areas and everywhere we go. So I'm going to flick quickly through some parts of a life cycle. These are black Jezebel eggs hatching. I can see the formatting has changed a bit. So black Jezebel caterpillars feed on a few different mistletoes. And so here they are. They're just coming out of their eggs. They're eating their eggs, and a few hours later they'd eaten all their eggshells. Most caterpillars eat their eggshells as their first meal. It's a gift from their mothers, which is then a gift from the plant in the first place, because it's provided food that make the eggs possible. So they were the caterpillars, or an egg mass. Some butterflies lay their eggs in groups, but most of them lay them singly. So, but we'll move on to a different life cycle, but that's the butterfly. Probably one of them became one of those pictures. So lemon migrants, if you see a bigger yellowish, whitish, pinkish butterfly flying around at the moment, they're bound to be lemon migrants. So right here we have an egg, which is almost certainly going to become a meal for that particular caterpillar. That is a freshly hatched caterpillar. It will be a few millimetres long, and there's one that's maybe a day old. And here, caterpillars need to change their skin 4 or 5 times because they have their skins are their skeletons, as a metaphor. So here it's anchored itself in one spot. Here it started crawling, and it's crawling itself out of its skin, and if you remove it from its anchor, it can't crawl out of its skin. And there's one that has recently done so. It's done this, it's eaten whatever food it needs to eat. Until 2015, I'd raised over 100, I'd never counted, but heaps of lemon migrants, and I spent my time talking to audiences saying, oh, you know you've got a lemon migrant caterpillar if it's green with a black and white stripe. But in 2015, we started raising some from Amelia, and my daughter and I were raising some from introduced plants that they have adapted to that are around the edge of Orley Park, and they came out no black stripe. A few tiny little dots which make them look like yellow migrant caterpillars, so I know it was a lemon migrant because it emerged as one. And then this coppery colour on coppery leaves. So my lesson from that is that whatever you think is true probably isn't. And that becomes a life lesson as well. So always question what you think you know. Here's one that's pupating. So it's done all its skin sheddings and it's attached itself by its tail. And this group of species, which are the whites and yellows, and I'll go into some other groups of them, they attach themselves by a silk sling as well. So it's done all of that, and here it goes. It's wriggling and squirming, and that caterpillar skin is coming off, and the pupal skin has formed underneath, which will harden into the pupal shell. And so there it's settled into its adult form. It came in 2 colour forms for that round. The first time round I did them, there was only 1 colour form. Here it is about to hatch out. So after about a week, they're really a quick species to emerge. And here it goes. It pumps up its wings. And this butterfly fools the best of us when we're starting out. It has 9 different colour forms. So I can recognise it by its size and its behaviour and something to its colour, because sometimes it's quite dark on the outside, sometimes it's got black, sometimes it hasn't. Sometimes they're limey. If you see a limey looking butterfly, then it's definitely a lemon migrant. But yeah, the names aren't always that consistent. So I'm going to go through a few families of butterflies because it's worth getting to know the patterns of their body plans, and their behaviours tend to be more similar when they're in the same family. So there's a family called the nymphs, and it has subgroups called the nymphs, the danaids and the browns. The browns are much more southern butterflies, so I don't have that many browns, but I think I've got 1 or 2. I can never remember. So a strain-painted lady, their caterpillars, as far as I know, only feed on paper daisies and billy buttons or yellow buttons. So if you see very messed up leaves with lots of frass all through it, that's the composting role that the caterpillar is playing. It's turning the leaves into nutrients for a future generation of something else. So Meadow Argus, both the Australian-painted lady and the Meadow Argus, you'll often see them flying quite low. So the other part of this talk is the butterfly high and low life, Lepidoptera high and low life. So I'm just going to point out where you might find them in that range, and if they've got disgusting habits that I know about. So we haven't seen many I haven't seen many Meadow Argus at all this year, but you'll see them patrolling open ground. And we do have some host plants usually here, because you do usually see them here, but it's been a very small migration. So they migrate north-south somewhat. Males patrol per area of ground. Now, every one of these images, it has a caterpillar, a chrysalis, and one of the host plants, sometimes 2. Oops, my balance is a little bit off. Please ask questions. If I'm saying anything that doesn't compute, please don't hang on to it. But ask questions if it's about the immediate slide I'm showing, please. So yellow admirals you don't see very often unless you're in a fairly wet or damp area, because they feed exclusively on nettles. So particularly if you are a vegetarian that is using nettles and makes apparently quite nice tea, and people have used it to colour and flavour pasta, you have to watch that you're not getting some inadvertent protein, because they live in rolled up leaves. So the suggestion is that vegetarians do actually get a lot of extra protein in this manner. But anyway, sorry, I'm a bit of a 40.
Are they only in Queensland?
I don't. There's Southeast Queensland butterfly, but I'd have to look. And the books, we left the book in the car. There's a book by Michael Graby on the Field Guide to Australia's Butterflies, and there's a more recent one by Gary Sankowski, and they show the range that So if you want to do this stuff, well, I've got a book called Create More Butterflies that covers 48 of them with their whole life cycle, and that was produced in 2005. And the Butterfly and Other Invertebrates Club has a list of every known host plant that's verified for a butterfly, caterpillar, and a few moths and a few others. And then there's the work by Braby or Gary Zankowski that shows a range. And Gary Zankowski's book's much newer. It's about 2 years old, 1 or 2 years old now, and it covers the whole of Australia and is very comprehensive. But yeah, so what's your stinging nettles? Varied egg fly. It's called a varied egg fly because the females can be extremely variable. The males, you can't capture that colour. It just doesn't photograph, or it didn't in the cameras that I was using at the time. So the female and male, when their wings are closed, and you mostly see them if they've settled with their wings closed, they look quite similar. Some butterflies, females and females are very different. So if you find the caterpillars, they're usually in fairly dense, very low-growing vegetation. The only time I've seen them reliably, and that's only 3 or 4 times, is when you've got Cytorhombifolia, I think it's called. Its common name is Cytorhombifolia in a dense sand, Paddy's lucerne. It's an introduced plant, but the few times that I have found them, they must be around. They feed on joyweed in this area. They feed on a wider range of plants. So most butterflies, caterpillars are very specific about what they're eating, and then the ones that eat a bit more, mostly it's up to say 26 plants. So, and that speaks to nearly all insects actually. Almost all insects that eat plants are specialised, and specialised means eat plants from 3 different families, and most of them are down to like 1, 2, 5, 10 plants. But this one lays the tiniest of eggs. She has a complete scattergun approach. She'll lay on anything and everything, and mostly they don't go through. But if she's laid on a plant that they can thrive on, whereas a lot of other butterflies, females, the species invests more in the next generation than this lot do. So it's always a strategy, scattergun or invest. So the caterpillar's there, yeah. So glass wings, these are completely fresh. So the definition of Lepidoptera is scaly wings. That's one of them, that's the main one in terms of insects. These ones and another species called clearwing swallowtail lose their scales very quickly. So this one eats native passion vines, and it has adapted to a few of the introduced passion vines as well. Its caterpillars, well, its eggs are laid in groups of up to 40. The chrysalis is an amazing little bauble. I reckon it's a little Art Deco decoration. Well, we learned Art Deco from creatures, let's put it that way. So, and there's now another species called the Tawny Costa, it introduced itself to northern Australia around Darwin somewhere in the early 2000s, and it has now migrated all through the east coast and is into northern New South Wales. But it hasn't come into my garden in West End yet, so I haven't paid any attention to it. It's done some interesting things to the formatting. Okay, so this is still the whites and the browns. Just go back a bit. So all of the ones that I've spoken about so far, they've got caterpillars that have got branched spines. So they look hairy, but they're not. and they don't sting. It's some sort of, it probably keeps tachinid flies, or it gives them a better way of defending themselves against tachinid flies that are designed to eat them. And they do need to be eaten. I'll tell you the story. Because when you start out, everybody I know starts out very precious about the caterpillars they've collected and get very disappointed when they end up with a tachinid fly or a bunch of wasps. But female butterflies are said to lay around 400 eggs, and it'll be more or less depending on how much they've invested in that next generation. But say 400 eggs, and say 200 of them are females, and it's almost certain that the ratio will be skewed in favour of females, but we'll stick with 200 as a thought experiment. So one female laying 200 female eggs multiplied in the next generation by another 200 eggs is 40,000 female caterpillars and 80,000 caterpillars. And in the third generation, that's 1.6 million female caterpillars. And, a lot of these in summer are there like a week to 10 days, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a month. Some of them are slower. So the whole world is about species regulating other species. They're regulating the plants. I'm getting into my talk for a few days' time. I'll shut up. But I just, because I keep coming across people being very precious about their caterpillars and not wanting the ants to eat their eggs. They're actually designed for the purpose. So if you start on raising caterpillars, you have my permission not to get upset about it. So this is a group of browns. The browns have got caterpillars that do look a bit similar, so it's very well camouflaged, but a lot of them have got this very green, very highly camouflaged chrysalis. So evening browns you'll disturb, they're low life. They fly around, they feed on grasses, and they've adapted to the introduced panic. It used to be called Panic Maximus or something. Panic and Maximum. Can't remember. It's had a name change. They are incredibly good if they settle. They are incredibly good at looking completely cryptic, as are a few other butterflies. So these are a late afternoon, evening flying butterfly, and you only see them during the day if you've disturbed them. So I have yet to find caterpillars and chrysalises of one that you do see if you're walking around in bushland. There's a dusky ringlet up here. I'm only talking about butterflies that are in this region. There's a dusky ringlet and a brown ringlet and an orange streak ringlet, so there's a few of them, and an orange ringlet. And that's the best photo I've ever got of one as well. Largely because I don't pay attention to any that I can't get the whole life cycle of. So I'm being selective in... There's too many photos of pretty butterflies out there and nobody knows what the rest of the animal actually looks like. And my job is to help people know what they look like. So this is from another group. This one's spectacular. There's 2 emperors in Australia, one in North Queensland. We've got this one. This one's Lepidoptera highlife. If you see that butterfly, it is usually whizzing past at a rate of knots at a quite high up. You can attract it down with beer and mashed bananas. And this pair had been feeding on rotting sap from a grapevine, and they get drunk. Now, the evening brown and this one, you can attract alcohol in any quantity, can actually kill a lot of other insects and butterflies. But so it has this amazingly spectacular caterpillar. So if it feeds on a wider range of plants in a wider range of families, but still not many more than 20. If it's on a ferny-leafed wattle, it ends up with huge numbers of bars. On plants with more entire leaves, it ends up with a few. I've seen one photo of one without any at all. Its chrysalis is quite cryptic, and usually it's they've crawled off the plant. And so it eats, as I said, ferny leaf wattles and brachychiton. I've found them on brachychiton here. Just around the corner here, there's a snowwood. I can't even remember how you say that one. It's had them on it as well. I'm good at remembering names when I've got the name in front of me. That's why I do the slides. We often have a population on site here of white-banded planes. They're a creek-line butterfly on the whole because their host plants are creek-line, very much more moist environments. They have a really stunning little caterpillar that's incredibly cryptic. It mostly looks like a bit of shriveled up leaf. And the butterfly lays her egg at the very tip of a leaf, and then it chews its way into the sides of the leaf and creates a debris field. I'm a science fiction nerd. And so it lives in the debris field and pupates in that. So, and this one and another one in this group have chrysalises that look like tiny bats. So if you look at them side on, they've got eyes pointing at you and they're the shape of little bats. So coda is a good host plant along here, and you quite often see it, but they also feed on the flame trees. And there the coda is feeding a scaly-breasted lorikeet, of which there are far too few now, from my point of view. So we're moving now into a group called the Danaids. You only see this one if you're actually behind a mangrove swamp, normally, because the vine it's changed its name to Vince toxicum very recently, carnosum. It feeds a lesser wanderer butterfly as well as the blue tiger, all of which will come up, so it's a great host plant, but it grows just behind mangroves as there's a little embankment where the casuarinas are growing, and that's where it grows. Stunning little caterpillar, little blob of a green chrysalis that's very cryptic until you get your eye in and see them. That one was posing for the shot. So still have to get a good one of the top view. So yeah, so it's one you have to go looking for really. But the host plant is useful if you have got a garden and you are not planting for local provenance. So you'll see blue tigers coming through in quite a big populations at times. They spent winter further north in Queensland, Gladstone and north, in quite dense aggregations. They're usually not reproducing, they're sexually non-active at that time. And then as the weather warms, they start flying south. And depending on how good a year they've come out of last year, depends on how many start heading south to start building up their populations again, and then late in summer they migrate northwards again. So every now and then you'll hear of someone that's got a mass of them coming through. There's a big mass just a bit more coastal from me. I'm in West End. I didn't see any. Everyone's saying, there's so many blue tigers. And I'm saying, no, there's not. But anyway, so it will also feed on the Vince toxicum, but one of its hosts is, or its main host in this area, is a corky milk vine that its normal habitat is growing up hoop pines. So I'm seeing far too many hoop pines that have got nothing growing up them. But if you think about hoop pines, they've got all their leaves at the end of their branches. So they're completely adapted to being scaffolding for vines. So go plant Secamone ellipticas up hoop pines and anything else that wants to grow up them. So this was when I first found them. They'd eaten themselves out of house and home at Mount French outside the reserve. They were ready to pupate, so I took a whole bunch home because they had nowhere to go, and raised them through. So that's a butterfly that flies a bit throughout the range, mostly a bit higher. It's not a ground dweller. Common crows. So I'll just go back a bit. So this butterfly, I don't know about that one. This one and this one are known to overwinter as adults. So they should be able to live up to 9 months, because that's a very common question. How long do butterflies live? Some of them can live a long time if they can feed as adults. This one eats probably a bigger range of plants than most of the others. It's adapted to mandevillas and stephanotis, and people who've got desert roses don't like them being chewed. And oleander. As kids, a lot of us saw their shiny silver chrysalises on oleander. And but one of their hosts is a monkey rope, a Posontia straminae. They also like Hoyas, but they only eat Hoyas if they're in somewhat of a sunlight. They don't. I had it growing all over the place, but it was all on the ground and quite low, and they weren't touching it. So I'm not sure Hoya's a preferred host. Lesser wanderers are, I guess people compare them as Australia's equivalent to the wanderer. It's not. They're in the same group of Danade butterflies. I'm still trying to find a very reliable host plant for this, though it is reliable on the Vince toxicum that the swamp tiger eats. But that's not a plant that's widely distributed outside of just behind mangroves. So we do get them here on site, and if they're on site, they're eating the introduced the introduced milkweed. So one of them is a white-flowered swamp plant, and the other is actually this pretty orange, yellow and reddish flowered thing called silk pod. But one of its native hosts is scented Tylophora. So, oops, can you get my phone? I'm doing a call. Thank you. Putting the wanderer in just to show you that, well, it's a naturalised Australian butterfly now, and a lot of councils have actually got it listed as a noxious weed, but you only really see it in places that are disturbed, and I think it's only noxious to horses. So, and horses are a really important economic animal for racing. So I think they've exaggerated a bit, but I'm in favour of insects. So just need to acknowledge my bias. So just moving on to the swallowtails. So there's 10 swallowtails that we will see in this region, and blue triangles are fairly common, and they're often seen around schoolyards because they have adapted to camphor laurels, but not enough to dent the camphor laurel population. They're mostly a higher flying butterfly. They're very distinctive. They're between blue tigers and blue triangles. If someone says they've got a blue butterfly, you can very quickly work out whether it was one or the other. There's not many that have got that much blue on them. The caterpillar is quite well camouflaged, so that's the head end up there. Their chrysalises completely mimic the back of native laurels. So it's actually got 3 veins on it, so if it was behind those leaves, let's say you learn to get your eye in. If you haven't got your eye in, you'd never see it. So a big lesson from doing this stuff is you start observing details in nature more and more, because you realise that they're more and more amazing. This was actually the very first butterfly I cut my teeth on. Back in 1982, I had started the Brisbane branch of the Rare Fruits Council, now called the Subtropical Fruit Club. And a few years later, I had a cutting of an introduced cinnamon to have as a food plant for making tea. And it had one sprig of beautiful new fresh growth, and a female blue triangle worked her way through the garden. You could see her landing tasting, found this beautiful shoot of the cinnamon, non-native cinnamon, and she laid an egg and she flew off, and that was one of the first ones I raised, along with the tailed emperor, which was laying on introduced Chinese celtis. But anyway, so a few of them have adapted, but they can only adapt to plants that aren't toxic to them, and most introduced plants are quite toxic to most native animals. So then there's a group, the orchids, the dainty, and the, I haven't got it, I didn't put it in, okay. Sorry, from one moment to the next I can't remember what I've put in. But there's a third butterfly called the Fuscus swallowtail that has adapted to citrus, introduced citrus. And it's one of the, it's actually an amazing plant for what has adapted to it. And you can also tell that if it is growing in bushland, it's not escaping, or at least it hasn't had a chance to escape yet. Because there's actually a book that, around the time I did my first book, 1992, there was someone from the University of Queensland doing a book on for orchidists on like natural control mechanisms, and she had 42 or 48 different spiders that were making introduced citrus home. Which, as soon as you've got a spider, you've got something that's much more. You've got a much more complex ecosystem to start with. So, the citrus was supporting quite a lot of other wildlife. I haven't seen any studies that compare it to the native citruses. But anyway, that's a very beautiful big butterfly. You most commonly see the male flying quite high, and it's very identifiable by these big white patches. So the females tend to stay closer to their host plants, so you don't see them flying around so much. The boys are looking for girls. What else would they be doing? Sorry. All of those three butterflies also eat native citrus. So on site here, I've seen that the finger limes that are on site are much more reliable for dainty swallowtails. So the chrysalis looks like a little bit of bark. Again, quite cryptic, a bit of dead leaf. The caterpillar's got a few little sort of spiny, fleshy spines, and it's got a row of dots. So it's a food plant we can share. So yeah, please, if there are any questions, as I said before. Okay, so checkered swallowtail is another very pretty, quite spectacular swallowtail. It's one that tends to, you see it very low on the ground because its host plant is originally, when I came across the descriptions of it, it was described as a weed of neglected lawns. And I found it in some grass that had been seeded along footpaths in West End at one stage. So the council must have gotten a lot of soil that had Cullen tenax seed in it. So, and the butterfly female, when she finds it, buries herself, like digs into the plant, and is quite hard to capture even taking a photo. But they tend to come through when the caper whites come through, and I'll talk about caper whites later. So they've got a range of host plants west of the Great Dividing Range and a long way inland. It's one of the more widely distributed butterflies, for the person that was asking before about butterflies. But they can be quite reliably enticed into a garden or anywhere. We've had them here. If you plant that particular little host plant, and it's so innocuous, and it has gorgeous little purple flowers, and the seed are edible. Apparently they make, roasted, they make a lovely poppy alternative. So I'm interested in food plants we can share.
Helen,
Yeah?
are there nurseries that sort of grow these plants for butterflies?
Yeah, I'm trying to get as many nurseries into the new book I've done for reworking the new book. It's going to be a while off yet. It's very patchy as to who has what, but there are some nurseries that are doing it. But a lot of the time, really, you just find people that know, join groups of people. Native Plants Queensland has a biannual plant sale, and quite often there's more. more obscure plants. Most of these plants are not in the commercial trade, despite doing a book called Butterfly Magic in 1992 was to start getting people interested in asking nurseries to stock this stuff, and it's just starting to take off now. But the problem with growing native plants in nurseries is butterfly caterpillars are designed to be population control agents. So as soon as you put in a nice little patch, and it only has to be like 2 tables worth, and you put it out in the nice sun, if it's a FIFO butterfly, as I call them, fly in, fly out, there's some that aren't, very soon every single plant has got an egg on it. And very soon you have to actually sell like chewed sticks. So I'm trying to make it a popular idea to sell pre-loved plants, but that hasn't caught on yet. But go out to nurseries and ask them, have they got any plants that might have been pre-loved? And sooner or later, it will catch on, hopefully. So I have been trying to get this to happen for more than a few years. But yeah, but a few of them do. So, and some of the catchment coordinating committees have got nurseries that have got some of this stock of some of these things. But you really need to look to see what their stock lists are. And then my recommendation is, now that I understand, I've scratched a little bit deeper, my understanding is that it's actually really worthwhile trying for as local a provenance as you can get. But you also need to take account of how the seeds are distributed, and if birds are distributing them, then the catchment's quite big, depending on how far the bird flies, and if it's windblown, then the catchment will be quite big. But if it's something that spreads very gradually, then it's been adapting to the plants around it for millennia, and if you start introducing seed from elsewhere, we're messing up so much of the genetics of plants and animals already. It'd be nice if a few of us sort of thought about it a bit more and didn't do it as much. Yeah, so just consider how the plant grows and propagates and spreads.
So what sort of things eat the butterfly eggs and larvae to avoid the whole tube stick end game?
Sorry, I can't.
Sorry, what sort of other plants or animals can you encourage so that you don't get 400 larvae
As soon as you
chewing
start,
on the plants?
as soon as you start doing this, they will come. If you've got it the more you concentrate host plants, the more you're going to concentrate. As soon as you concentrate anything, you concentrate the things that can eat it. I think COVID is doing that to us right now.
So an insect hotel would be beneficial to have with your native garden, or not necessarily?
There's on the same principle, if you concentrate a food source of any type, you bring in all the parasites, parasitoids, and hyperparasitoids. It's really complex when you start. So the recommendation now, like everybody's selling bee hotels, because that was the thing to do, and I even got some put in, we worked on working bees to put some in here. And just as that was happening, the advice was coming out is don't put in bee hotels. And also, I find the term bee hotel very challenging. Hotels are for casual sex. Bee homes, they're actually females that are nurturing the next generation. That's a home, not a hotel.
Yeah. Not a brothel.
And not a brothel, yeah. But I'm not winning that particular debate in the general community, but I'll keep arguing for it, because it has a nicer ring to it than a bee hotel anyway. But they're seriously a really bad idea, because you're concentrating the food source for all of the things that will eat them. And bees are not, they will interact with butterflies on some flowers some of the time, but they're not predatory on. But what you will get is some of the paper nest wasps. They're actually amazing creatures. They recognise each other's faces. And I'm not convinced that they don't recognise human faces.
They do.
Yeah. Because if you leave them alone, they will warn you. You just need to know where the nest is, which is a bit of a problem. And if you do get stung, you use a bit of bicarb soda in like slightly wetted, and usually the sting's gone. So they've had a really bad rap for a very long time. But yeah, wasps, tachnid flies, there's all sorts of other, there's a few different types of wasps that are parasitoids. So a parasite is something that lives on you but doesn't kill you. A parasitoid kills its host. And most of the things that have been called parasites of insects have actually been parasitoids. And yes, as soon as you do it, that was one of the first lessons after we put in like 10 or 15 butterfly host plants, was the wasps started turning up. And the tachnid flies, in no time at all, the tachnid flies were there. And so, in fact, this is a really good photo. That is a tachnid fly that was stalking that particular caterpillar. And you can see them walking along leaves, and all caterpillars leave a silk trail where they're walking. And you can see them sort of, well, I imagine I can see them testing to see if they can find a trail to follow. I haven't followed it through to know for certain, but that's the sort of behaviour. They're doing a whole jerky movement whenever they're landed. It didn't get that caterpillar, because that caterpillar became that chrysalis, and I think that female from memory. So it feeds on a little native a pipe flower. So we hear lots of stories about Dutchman's pipe. We've got a few native pipe flowers ourselves. And this one's only recently been given a name. And there were actually one or two plants here back when I first got involved, but I can't find them anymore. And tried to reintroduce them, but they haven't taken. So, yep, keep asking questions if you like. So we're looking at the whites and yellows now, and caper whites feed on native caper, and there's a native caper just behind you with a life cycle sign on it, like just in front of the toilet block there. In the last few years, there's been a lot of native capers, caper whites on the plant, and it's been shredded. These butterflies have had relationships with these plants, in most cases, probably since before we were walking upright in the Serengeti. So the plant still exists and the butterfly still exists, so whatever's going on, it's not causing either of them any harm, is my take on it. So this one comes through usually early November. Shall we say, all the records were, you could almost set your calendar by them coming through in early November. But the last few years they've started doing some odd things. Some stay in the Brisbane Valley and don't migrate westward anymore and keep breeding. They come through a lot earlier as well. Somewhere along the eastern seaboard, you'll hear that there's a report of just masses of these butterflies coming through. And that's just, there's been a population explosion. Whether we've contributed to something to make that explosion happen, or whether that's a natural phenomenon, it's been recorded for quite a long time. So native capers actually feed 5, maybe 6 different butterflies, and another one is this gorgeous little caper gull, which can also sometimes be seen migrating at the same time. A very obscure little green caterpillar, funny little chrysalis. This is its head end. Again, it's designed to break up its pattern, so it isn't easy to be spotted. Very beautiful flowers, but they're very short-lived. I'm told that native capers are more delicious than Mediterranean capers, but I haven't had a chance to try that out yet. So it will be an interesting thing if this plant tries to be brought into the bush food industry, because there's so many things that find it yummy. Because as soon as the caper whites find a plant in the open sun, they build up a population, and often it's stripped bare of all the leaves, even older leaves. I've got about 6 of them in my garden in West End, and some of the leaves were ones that were chewed back in 2016. They'd chewed all the leaves in the top and come a bit further down the plant. So it also feeds a striated pearl white and 2, and I'm thinking maybe a 3rd, more northern pearl white has made it to Brisbane, but I haven't had it identified yet. But I've had this population of whites in the garden for months, and I could never find their caterpillars until September. you could always see the leaves being eaten. But eventually I saw this very fresh frass underneath on a spider web. So, gotcha. There's a caterpillar here somewhere because it was still nice and green. This is the low life bit. And the caterpillar had a white edge down the middle of its back, and it was sitting exactly on the edge of the leaf where it was chewing. So the white edge on its back looked like a bit of old chew mark. It was, but Amelia has discovered for us that you can see caterpillars more easily if you hold them up to a sort of a brighter light, because then they might be very well disguised, but the light shining, there's a different density. So I'm going to start applying that. It helps to have a daughter who is helping find bugs. So yellow tulip or Diopetes diplantii is also a more wet environment plant, and it feeds the yellow albatross. I've got about 1 female and I think 3 male trees in the garden, and I get these occasionally, and I'm pretty sure a few other things are eating it, but I never catch them on time. So butterfly caterpillars you tend to find more during the daytime. They're just somehow easier to spot, or maybe my eyes just in better. But my understanding is a lot more moths, and there's no big difference, but more moths, they're a spectrum, feed at night. I think there's 1 or 2 species of another group of blues that feed on the flowers. There is a strong suggestion that those big granny's closet moths that don't do anything to your clothes also eat this plant. But I haven't seen that verified. I've seen one report of it. So if you're finding a weird caterpillar, the thing to do with this is if you find a caterpillar and you've got access to a food source, is very soon I'm going to be working on how to raise caterpillars, hand raise them so you can document them, rear them and release them and get photos and stick it on our naturalist with the plant that you've raised it on. And then we'll start having much better records of what's eating what. I better move it because I showed you a bit of the lemon migrant going through its life cycle earlier. Yellow migrants feed on Senna gordichorii, and that butterfly will come quite low, but the Sennas can also climb quite high. It's a scrambling plant, it's not a vine. We've planted it all through the site. Part of that reason is, and there are the toilet blocks, it looks like Easter cassia, but it isn't. And a lot of people say, we've got to pull those plants out, they're Easter cassia. No, there are a whole pile of native Sennas, and the whole point is to start helping people learn to see the difference. But I'm working on someone that can tell with someone. With these, with all the different Sennas and cassias, they've got glands in different parts of their leaves. And each Senna has a different configuration. So once I get nailed the person down who's done a whole lot of work on this, there'll be a little booklet available on how to pick your Senna. So it's because there's a whole lot of introduced cassias now as well, and some of them do feed lemon migrants. I don't think there's too many lemon migrants on any of them. Sorry. They feed lemon migrants. I don't think there's too many yellow migrants on the introduced ones. There's popcorn cassia that people have planted and is escaping. So then there are a few Jezebels. You can tell who's named these butterflies, can't you? Scarlet Jezebel. Somebody that was interested in scarlet things and Jezebels. These butterflies, caterpillars, feed on mistletoes, and they perform an incredibly important function in eating the mistletoes, but the mistletoes also provide an incredibly important ecological function in the environment. They're actually providing food the nutrients get recycled much more quickly when there's mistletoes. And there's a fellow who's done a book on mistletoes and birds, and he removed all the mistletoes from a certain size area and found that the bird diversity dropped by 40%. So I can never remember the area. But we get these on site. These butterflies tend to be higher up when you're seeing them. They tend to be sort of more winter flyers as well, and breeders. And then quickly there's this other really big group. Oh, there's two others, but I'm running out of time. Most of these are very small, but they're gorgeous. So Alphatonia is a smorgasbord plant, and one of the things it feeds is the small green banded blue. Beautiful little butterfly if you do get to see it. There's a native plumbago, and the introduced plumbago feeds the Plumbago Blue. So if you're seeing any little butterflies hanging around a plant, they're almost invariably females laying eggs on that plant. So there's a common pencil blue that feeds on, I think that's a tuckaroo just out there. Might not be, yeah, but it looks like a tuckaroo. And then, because we're running out of time, the other group that's really big, so there's something like 60 different blues and coppers in this area. And they don't attract your attention to start with, but it's the best way to get to know them is know the host plant. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that, folks. And then there's this other really big group called skippers and flats and Hesperidae, flats and ochres and awls. And I haven't got a lot of life cycles of these because an awful lot of them eat grasses. And there's one that eats palms, and it lives in curled up, it curls the leaves up. In fact, an awful lot of the darts actually curl up leaves in the length. So it's quite a bit of fun if you find a curled up leaf. When you get into this stuff, you start looking at everything, and you look at curled up leaves, and you see a little head in it, then it'll be one of the skippers or darts. They're all in the same group. The really interesting thing about orange and I think yellow palm darts is you can tell the sex of the larvae. If it's got 2 dots, it's a male, and if it's a female, it doesn't. Normally you can't tell to the naked eye. You can't tell.
What are the dots? Are they the gonads?
Gonads, yeah. So that's really it's unusual. And then the regent skipper, there's a little bit of a campaign. We've planted some of the Wilkias on site here. It's a very pretty butterfly, but I haven't actually managed to raise it because it's a deep rainforest plant. Early stage caterpillars scrape the leaf, the back of the leaf. I've dehomed this one. They built a lot of the skippers, awls, flats, and all the rest of them build shelters. And this one usually has stitched 2 leaves together. But in this case, I separated it out. And then this is pure lowlife. Simona skippers or Splendid Ochres, the best time to get a photo of them is when they're eating bird poo. So they sit still, because normally they're fast little things, like usually a bit low, because they eat lamandras. So there's something like 5 or 6 different skippers or ochres also that eat, painted skipper and a few others that eat lamandras. Lamandras can also be eaten by us if you're really desperate. You can use it for weaving as well, but apparently if you pull the leaves out, the base tastes quite good. The caterpillar lives in a little shelter that curls up in the stitched leaves, and it pupates in the same way. And I think that, and we've got the eastern duskflat, and we've got them. They're a creepline butterfly, usually a bit low. You often don't see them, but if you ever see leaves that have got a little chew mark out of them and folded over, then that's what their early instar caterpillars do. So they shed their skin 4 or 5 times, and each stage is called the first, second, third, fourth, fifth instar. So that'll be a first instar caterpillar. And then this one was one that was ready to pupate, and it had formed a curled up leaf. I've got a sequence that I have to still put together of a bronze flat, and it does the most amazing job of building a shelter for itself. I managed to get photographs of the whole construction phase at one stage. Anyway, I'm on for a few more things in case people want to catch up with me or see what some of the rest of the story is about. It's all in the program. This has turned into a mess. It was all neatly lined up when I put it on the drive, but clearly whatever font I used didn't work. And so I'm doing, tonight we're looking for fireflies. Tomorrow night we've got a light installation, seeing what creatures come for us. So we're doing that combination again on Wednesday night, and I've got several talks on Thursday, and then one talk on some stingless bees and native bee pollination and pollination more generally. So,
Helen, can you tell everyone that creatures of the light and the finding fireflies, at the beginning of the butterfly walk there's a sign.
okay,
So just let everyone know. It's opposite the general store near the toilet block.
okay.
Did you guys hear that?
Opposite if you want to come to finding fireflies or creatures of the night, then we need to meet at a sign
Called Fireflies Meeting Point.
called Fireflies Meeting Point, and we'll take you from there to wherever we're going to look for things. It's been so dry, there's not a lot of fireflies, but few have been seen, and they're magical creatures, and I really want to tell people the story of fireflies so that everybody starts looking for them, because they should be in every gully coming off, any wettish gully coming off any of the ranges around here, and nobody seems to know about them. And they're amazing creatures. They're really complex life cycles. But yeah, so meet near the general store. From the general store, I think you'll see the sign.
On the side of the entrance to the butterfly walk on the
Okay.
left. Yeah.
So just over.
In front of the toilet, pretty much, toilet block.
We don't all know where the butterfly walk is. We know where the store is, but where's the butterfly walk?
Oh, the butterfly walk is.
I don't know where it is.
I don't even know if it's on the map.
If you look at the general store, it's like here. There's a toilet block here. There's a white tent that takes you through the butterfly walk. The sign is right next to the white tent.
And there's a sand pit as well, really
Left to
close
the
to
bar.
it.
Yeah.
It's a walk that we've spent 16 years or more, 17, 18, 19 years enriching with host plants for butterflies. So it's more of an arboretum, which now I would never do again, but because I would be planting local natives. But at the time, we still didn't know about regional ecosystems and stuff, or at least it wasn't widely known. But it's still useful to see because it's massively increased the diversity of... so there was a little study done of spiders on the butterfly walk compared to an area that hadn't been revegetated, and the spider diversity was massive compared to the unrevegetated area. And that's the indication. So there'll be spiders eating the caterpillars. I've got people send me pictures of spiders eating caterpillars. There's bugs that eat the caterpillars. There's wasps that eat the eggs, where they parasitize the eggs, and then the egg becomes another wasp. There's some incredibly tiny wasps on the planet. There's tachinid fly. There's just, basically they're food for the rest of the food web. All insects and invertebrates that lay lots of eggs are. There are, of course, maternal insects that look after their young, and they have less babies, and so they're less food for other animals because they're more looked after. Okay, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Just on 3 o'clock.